बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। आज यहाँ ICCM में मिल्टन सेंटर के अंदर MP गार्नेट जीनियस साहब को बुलाया गया है, जो कि विजिट कर रहे हैं अल्बर्टा से। वहाँ पर शेरवुड पार्क फोर्ट सस्कैचुअन अल्बर्टा के जो है MP हैं। एक बड़ा इम्पोर्टेंट बिल जो है वो फिल लॉरेंस और MP गार्नेट जो है ना वो लेकर आ रहे हैं। वो इम्पोर्टेंट बिल क्या है? वो इम्पोर्टेंट बिल ये है कि C281 जो है वो अपनी 7th को जो है वो पास होने जा रहा है। उसके लिए अवेयरनेस पैदा की जा रही है सोसाइटी के अंदर कि व्हाट इज दिस सी बिल। 3 एरियाज के ऊपर ये बिल जो है वो उसके अंदर अमेंडमेंट आ रही है। 3 एरियाज कौन कौन से? ह्यूमन राइट्स के अंदर, ह्यूमन राइट्स के हवाले से इसके अंदर अमेंडमेंट है कि जो ममालिक जहाँ पर जो ह्यूमन राइट्स के इश्यूज हैं और वो इंडिविजुअल को यहाँ पर बिजनेस कर रहे हैं या कोई इस तरह से कोई काम कर रहे हैं, तो उन इंडिविजुअल्स के ऊपर जो है वो पार्लियामेंट जो है वो सैंक्शन लगाने की बात कर सकती है। इस हवाले से बात होगी। दूसरी उसके अंदर जो है वो ब्रॉडकास्ट लाइसेंसिंग के हवाले से कि जो लोग भी ह्यूमन राइट्स को यहाँ पर जो भी वीडियो कंपनीज हैं वो ह्यूमन राइट्स के हवाले से जो है अगर अवेयरनेस कुछ पैदा करेंगी, बल्कि मुखालफत हिमायत करेंगी कि ह्यूमन राइट्स वायलेशन की, तो उनके ऊपर जो है उनके जो ब्रॉडकास्टिंग लाइसेंस है उसके हवाले से बात होगी। तीसरा जो अहम तरीन मौजू है इसके अंदर वो है क्लस्टर एम्यूनिशन के हवाले से बात हो रही है। और वो जो है वो जो भी क्लस्टर एम्यूनिशन जो कंपनियां बना रही हैं उनके हवाले से जो है ना वो बिल लिखा है। तो हम जो है यहाँ पर आज MP गार्नेट साहब जो है आएंगे, एक प्रेस अपनी ब्रीफिंग भी देंगे और सवाल जवाब की एक नशिश भी होनी है। तो आइए हम जो है फिल गार्नेट साहब के प्रोग्राम देखते हैं कि वो आज अपनी इस नशिश के अंदर क्या बात करते हैं। उसके बाद फिर मैंने उनसे 1-to-1 जो है एक कम्युनिकेशन भी करनी है और वो भी आप देखना नहीं भूलिएगा।
Part I would say is the Uyghur issue, Rohingya Muslim issues, or any issue in terms of human rights. MP Garnett Genuis has been always vocal and very effective and always there for the ethnic communities and for us. And one more introduction also, that he has a special place in our heart, that that his wife is also from Pakistan, Dr. Rebecca Genuis, and in that sense also he has a great knowledge in terms of the South Asian culture and our issues also.
So there are obviously many important issues that we could discuss, different issues that conservatives are working on, and happy to dialogue about some of those other issues. But I'll focus on. I'm spending this week in the Greater Toronto area out to promote an important private members initiative that conservatives have put forward. The bill was put forward by MP Philip Lawrence, who's from the Peterborough area, and I'm seconding the bill. It's called the International Human Rights Act, and I've got a real passion for human rights issues, for Canada, yes, being a strong free democracy, but also a voice for freedom and justice on the world stage, and that's why we kind of put together a series of proposals in this International Human Rights Act to try to shift and orient Canadian foreign policy towards a stronger emphasis on human rights and to hold the government accountable to follow through on human rights issues. And so we've put forward Bill C281. This bill does not mention any specific countries or regions. So some people ask, well, does it apply here? Does it apply here? It doesn't specifically apply or not apply to any region, but it's about shaping the way that Parliament and the government engage on human rights issues in general. It requires the government to prepare and table in Parliament an annual report on what the Canadian government is doing on international human rights, and to include as part of that report information about those who are facing unjust detention, prisoners of conscience, and what the government is doing to try to secure their release. There's some ability for the government to redact some of that information, if maybe that's what the imprisoned person wants, but or under some other criteria. But generally, it's about requiring the government to compile and publish information, because when these people that are unjustly detained, when their names are published, it helps draw more attention to their situation. The bill includes an amendment to one of our sanctions laws, so that parliamentary committees can nominate or recommend someone to be sanctioned. And so that's another tool for Parliament to hold the government accountable or push the government to sanction individuals that are involved in arbitrary detention or other forms of human rights abuses. The bill includes an amendment to the Broadcasting Act. We have instances where state-run media in other countries where the government is sanctioned or is committing genocide, they're able to get broadcasting licenses to push their message here in Canada. We've even had instances of people that have been subject to torture and forced confessions and have their forced confessions aired on these media channels that are then played in other Western countries, Canada and elsewhere. So we want to remove the broadcasting licenses that are used by the mouthpieces of violent authoritarian regimes. And then the bill also contains an amendment to the Cluster Munitions Act to prohibit investment in cluster munitions. Cluster munitions are a kind of bombs that similar to landmines that have a big impact in terms of loss of civilian life, and then also often are kind of leave behind bombs that could be unexploded and could cause problems for civilians later on. So Canada has signed on to a convention to try to end the use of cluster munitions, but then what we're adding with this bill is the prohibition on investment in cluster munitions. So as you can get a sense, this bill covers a lot of different ground, right? It's about reporting, it's about broadcast, it's about cluster munitions, but all with the goal of emphasizing the importance of human rights and making the government more accountable to Parliament on issues around human rights, creating tools that Parliament can use for saying, what is the government doing on human rights and how do we hold them accountable? How can we recommend people for sanctions? And also, if Parliament passes a motion recognizing a genocide, as we did with the Uyghur genocide, then those responsible can no longer have access to our airwaves through the Broadcasting Act and then the cluster munitions piece. So the timing of my visit here is just around the fact that the bill is coming to a final vote. It will be at a final vote on June the 7th. So we would like your support and everyone's support in trying to ensure this bill gets passed. And so there'll be an interim vote next Wednesday on May the 31st and a final vote on June the 7th. And if it passes at that stage, then it'll pass the House of Commons and go on to the Senate. And our hope is to get this through and into law before whatever the next election is. And the election could be at any time, right? So the sooner the bill is passed, the more confidence we have that that we're going to get the result we want. And this will not just affect one government or one, or the current set of situations. This will be a bill that we hope will be in place for decades into the future, and will provide more tools for parliamentarians of all stripes, and in the case of all governments, to be able to push them to do more, to be more active on human rights issues. So that's the nature of Bill C281. There's some information on the brochure there. You can there's a QR code on there that will take you to an online petition, so you can enter your name there and also share that online petition. And again, think about contacting your member of Parliament. I suppose most of you it would be the Milton riding. And we have another important vote coming up on an opposition motion on Monday, and this is a motion put forward by our leader Pierre Pulver on drug policy and something called safe supply. So we're very concerned about the opioid crisis, more and more of an impact of drugs in our community, and the Liberal government has launched this what they call a safer supply program, which is basically where they give pharmaceutical grade drugs to people that have addictions, and so that they're not buying street drugs. But the impact of this has been, and we've seen it especially in Vancouver, it's made drugs more available, it's increased the problem of drug addiction. And Conservatives are saying we should cancel these programs of giving drugs to addicts and instead put that money into treatment and recovery programs.
So my question is that, because I try to read, but it looks like very generic. So what are some criteria? Because definitely in the committee you guys are discussing it. So what are some criteria of human rights that included in this one? Because there's an issue always there that when we're trying to target some nation or some country or something, there's a possibility that under the cover of this human rights, we try to target those. So we want to see the criteria instead of what generic criteria we are bringing in this bill.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good question in that the bill doesn't provide a specific definition of human rights, but we have human rights covenants, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights internationally, our own domestic human rights law that generally define what we think of human rights. I'll tell you how when I think of human rights, start from the basis that they're human rights, that they're rights for humans. So it makes sense to start with what is a human being before we speak about what is a right for a human being. There are certain rights that come from exchange. For instance, if I hire someone, they have a right to their wages. So those aren't rights that I don't owe everyone wages. I owe the person who works for me wages. Human rights are the rights that are the things that are due to all human beings by virtue of their nature. I think we share this belief in the image of God being in everyone, that God created everyone with inherent value and dignity, that all human beings have inherent worth and dignity, and governments, other people in their community should treat them in a way that recognizes their inherent human dignity, which means they shouldn't be arbitrarily denied their liberty, killed, subject to torture, gross unusual punishment. These are things that are enumerated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think you're right to say as well that sometimes in our discourse the term human rights is actually applied to all kinds of things that are not actually rooted in these kinds of documents and don't come from that recognition of inherent human dignity. But this is what I think of in terms of human rights. I think this is what has been the traditional definition of human rights, is that things that flow from the inherent dignity of the human person.
And regarding is that because if this is generic law you're bringing in, it will target many countries, which is conservatives are alive with them, because there are many human rights issues is going on in the world. Just maybe some of them liberals like to talk about, some of them conservative don't want to talk about. So that's why I'm saying it's a very generic law. So it will cover everything that looks like to you, because it's coming under the banner of UNO and all those bodies which are dictating that what are the human rights, right?
Yeah, but I would just say, I think there are always going to be some marginal cases where someone says, okay, I have a right to a clean environment, and that means in this case you can't build your project, and someone else says, no, I have a right to my livelihood, and that means, so there are always going to be cases where people assert rights, and there's going to be conflicts of rights, and there are many cases where these things do come up. But I think there's also a body of cases in which we can all agree, right? We can all agree that clearly people shouldn't be treated in a certain way, and there are many instances around the world where there are those obvious cases that we can deal with. But this bill does enumerate, in cases of genocide, which is clearly defined, the people involved in that genocide shouldn't have access to a broadcasting. Yeah, and then the reporting requirements. I think it's true that different governments might prioritize different things. That will be in the report, and that's part of the accountability function. So people can look through the reports that they're providing to Parliament and say, is this the right emphasis or not? But it's an accountability function around what they're doing on human rights, and that accountability is positive because it allows for the kind of conversation.
One is regarding Bill 281, and second is drug policy. The first is 281. We welcome to you that you table to the Parliament this bill. My question is that there is any big and major deadlock between conservative and liberal government about this bill, number one. And second thing, if you are in the government, so what about your drug policy to Canadian citizens?
Yeah. With this bill at second reading, all parties supported it, but the Liberals have at the committee stage, they tried to put forward some amendments to water down certain parts of it. For instance, they didn't want to have to include information in the report about the about detained political prisoners, and so there were a few amendments that they put forward on the Broadcasting Act part of it as well, where they didn't want it to apply to in cases where Parliament had recognized a genocide. They only wanted it to apply in cases where individuals had been sanctioned. So I think just the importance of the discussion of human rights, the bill has had a lot of momentum and a lot of support that has, and we're hopeful that it will still get all party support at the final stage, but there have been some attempts at watering it down, which is why it's very helpful for us to raise public awareness around it, and we hope not only that the government will support it, but that the senators that Liberals have appointed will support it and pass it quickly as well. Because sometimes what you see is that if people, they don't want to be seen to oppose it, but there's things about it they don't like, they'll slow it down or try to delay it in various ways. And so we want to see this bill passed and passed quickly. There were some good refinements that were made at committee, and I hope it'll be able to now complete the process. In terms of what our policy on our approach on drug policy will be, there's a few key things. We will end the safer supply, so-called failure of giving away dangerous drugs to people that are struggling with addictions. We will put all of the resources from that into treatment and recovery programs. Also, the big opioid crisis we have right now, a big cause of it was that there were certain pharmaceutical companies that made like Purdue Pharma especially, that made false claims about opioids and that over-promoted them. In the United States, those companies have been made to pay compensation, and that compensation has been used to fund treatment and recovery programs as well. So we will launch a major lawsuit against those companies that were responsible for fueling the opioid crisis, and we will put that money into treatment and recovery as well. It's been conservative policy for a long time to say that treatment and recovery has not received the support it needs in Canada right now. If somebody is struggling with that addiction, and especially in parts of BC, if they're looking for drugs to get, they can get them easily. But if they're trying to get into treatment and recovery, and I think that's true across the country, they often have a hard time accessing in a timely way that support for treatment and recovery. There's not enough support, there's a waiting list and that. So it just makes so much more sense, recognizing that the dignity of every person, the potential in every person to turn their life around, to live drug-free lives, that we should provide that support for treatment and recovery, and we should take the resources that are being spent on the safer supply failure, and also that are being spent on, or the resources from the companies, that the profits that the companies made that were responsible for fueling this, and put that towards treatment and recovery.
What are some potential challenges and criticisms that Bill C281 might face in the city system process? In the legislative process?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Because of the importance of human rights, I think is generally recognized. There was nobody that was arguing against the principle of the bill, but there's been a lot of discussion and debate about some of the details. You know, if the government's going to publish a report, how much information should be in their report? When we require the government to report back about individuals that are sanctioned, we said the government should report back in 40 days. The government said, no, that's too short. We want more time. So we ended up negotiating and agreeing to effectively 120 days, right? So we tried through the committee process to be reasonable, to negotiate, but also to stand our ground on the fundamental points.
My question is to very basics. Phil Lawrence conceived the idea and you seconded it.
Yeah.
So what were those cases of genocide or human rights issue which touched you guys so that you table this bill?
Yeah.
Definitely we see something and then we feel that now we need to act on it. What were those couple of two examples?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I know that there are many different cases that we have engaged on and heard about over the years, and when we've had town halls on this bill, it's been a huge spectrum of people from different parts of the world and with different kinds of concerns. And actually some people, looking at situations that I haven't even necessarily been following, that say this bill will help in this particular case or situation. The Broadcasting Act provisions in particular recognize something that's happening with the government of China, which is that you have instances of Chinese state-controlled media outlets that are able to broadcast their message, and you compare that with RT. So RT controlled by the Russian government, and RT is right after the latest invasion of Ukraine was taken off the air. But you have misinformation from Russia that's still appearing on Chinese state television. You have instances of forced confessions that have appeared. Propaganda that's enabling Uyghur genocide and other forms of persecution, and that can be broadcast on the Canadian airwaves. So I would say for that instance, for that instance, it's that particular case, the Uyghur genocide, and some of the other things that have happened in China. We are seeing on the cluster munitions provisions, we are seeing a lot of use of cluster munitions. In the invasion of Ukraine, and so the horrific impact on civilians of the use of cluster munitions. Arbitrary detention. I mean, in Eritrea, there's a journalist who has been detained for close to 20 years. Again, in terms of advocacy for release. Hussein Shalil is a case we've been advocating on a lot. He's a Canadian citizen, ethnic Uyghur, and he was effectively kidnapped during travel to Uzbekistan. He's been back in China, and he's been detained there now for over 15 years. And I met his wife a few times, and they've got 4 sons. The youngest son has never met his dad because his mom was pregnant when his dad was kidnapped and is held in prison in China. So it's cases of arbitrary detention like that, and there are many others, but this is one that hits home personally for me because I've met his wife, I've seen the boys, and just can't imagine what that's like knowing your dad is out there somewhere.
So my question regarding this bill when it comes to the human rights protection, so we have seen in the past that human rights protection is like every time government is picking and choosing, there are certain violations that are happening in a certain part of the world where things are like human rights are badly violated, but government never talks about it. And we have seen this in the Venezuela as well and in the Brazil as well. So what may make this, what should we expect in this bill? I mean to say, we are definitely looking forward to have your comments next, right? So do you think that this can be like, you will be raising voice against those countries that people think are, the superpowers? You guys will be talking about that too.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, and this bill, it's an accountability tool. So I think it helps to give Parliament more power, more tools for putting pressure on governments of all stripes. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that there are sometimes going to be apparent inconsistencies, right, in terms of how situations are treated, and every situation is going to be different in some respects, right? On one day, a judgment call may be made that this form of advocacy is more effective. In another case, judgment call is made that a different form of advocacy is more effective. And I have a general bias towards speaking out as being a good tool for human rights advocacy. Sometimes the government says, oh no, you're using quiet diplomacy, and sometimes that's just an excuse. But sometimes it's not just an excuse. Sometimes, having those conversations in private in a way that doesn't shame someone, sometimes that's more effective, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes that's just an excuse for domestic audience, right? So it's difficult to look for complete and perfect consistency in an approach because it shouldn't be formulaic. It should be based on where those pressure points are, and it may be what other things are going on at the time, right? That may dictate what can be done effectively. I think our starting premise should be universal human dignity, that the right of someone doesn't depend on where they live or other aspects of the right. It's universal. But how we walk that out will vary in practice. I hope with this bill passing that there will be more tools for parliamentarians to see those reports, to ask those questions, to recommend people for sanctions. The executive still preserves the discretion, right? It's still up to the government of the day to determine, for instance, who gets sanctioned. But parliamentary committees putting forward those names to raise that question and say, well, wait a second, sanctioned a lot of officials in this country and not anyone in this country, and they seem to be doing broadly similar things. And it forces that justification.
So we have here MP Garnett Genuis, who is from the Sherwood Park, Port Saskatchewan, Alberta, and he bringing a very important motion seconding the very important motion in the Parliament, that Bill C281, and he's touring GTA to bring the awareness to the community that what is this Bill 281. So let's meet Garnett Genuis, MP from Sherwood Park. So here with me, Mr. MP Garnett Genuis, and he is from the MP from the Port Saskatchewan, Alberta, and actually the Sherwood Park, right?
Yeah.
So thank you once again. This is my second time that we are speaking
Thank
on
you.
Toronto
It's
360.
great to be with you again.
Thank you, Jed. Thank you, MP. And it's really my pleasure that you gave me the time. I know that you have a very tight schedule, but you are on the tour of GTA on a very specific agenda. And I already get the news that on Bill 281,
That's right.
you are trying to bring the awareness to the society and the whole community that why this bill is very important for the entire community.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. I know that there are 3 areas in this bill which is covered. One is related to the human rights, one is cluster ammunition, and one is the broadcasting industry. So these are the 3 areas which is covered in that one. So first of all, go to the human rights one, because and that's because when we're talking about human rights is a very broader word. And this bill is not targeting the country but the individuals, I think so. That's what I understand.
Basically, in general, it's a human rights bill. It's the International Human Rights Act, and the goal is to make Parliament more engaged with human rights, make the government more accountable to Parliament on human rights issues, and to strengthen Canada's engagement promoting human rights around the world. As conservatives, as a conservative, I believe very much in freedom and democracy and rule of law, and I want Canada to be a voice for those things on the world stage as well. So this bill requires the government to table an annual report on human rights to Parliament on the work it's doing internationally to promote human rights, to include information about those facing arbitrary detention or the work government is doing to secure their release. It requires the government to respond when recommendations come from parliamentary committees for individuals to be sanctioned. These are the kinds of measures in the bill really to strengthen the government's engagement on human rights issues and to push our government to be more of a voice on international human rights issues.
I know that you're working with the Uyghur long time, and you are raising the voice as well. So, and you are the champion of human rights. So like Uyghur, we have also issues in India, right? We have the Kashmiris have there for many years. There are human rights issues is going on, and I hope that everything like that will be covered in this bill as well.
Yeah, I'll say that the bill doesn't name specific communities or situations. Really, it's about establishing a framework that would apply everywhere in the world, and we want it to be timeless, right? Sadly, there may be human rights abuses that emerge 20 years from now that are in situations that we're not even thinking about today. So we want the bill to be universal in its application, but it also provides accountability tools. So people who are concerned about a particular situation can go to that human rights report and say, why wasn't this issue mentioned, or why wasn't this community mentioned? It's a tool for advancing human rights, but also for accountability on issues to do with human rights. And I'll just say, absolutely we need to be engaged in thinking about and talking about human rights issues in India. I think every country is different, every situation is different.
Yes.
So I'd be cautious about saying, this is like this, but at the same time, are there human rights issues that require our attention there? Absolutely.
Okay, that's a great one, and nice to hear from conservatives. So other question is very important, that our youth, there's a huge population of youngsters here who are going universities, right? and there's one. They have a great concern about how the rise of the fees and expenses studying is increasing day by day. And we didn't see a good support from the government, because if they take the OSAP or loans or something, they have to pay back anyhow. And if they not pay back, they have to put interest as well there. So what's the government, as a conservative, this important issue, is there any policy you are thinking in the next election will be there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. If you look across the board, life is becoming more expensive. Things are becoming less affordable. And you can break it down and you can say, groceries are more expensive, going to university is more expensive, buying a home is much more expensive, right? Childcare is more expensive. And sometimes the Liberals' approach has been to try to isolate these things and say, well, we're going to give you a little more money for this, a little more money for that. The big question we want to ask is, why is everything becoming more expensive? Inflation has gone up dramatically under this government because debt has gone up dramatically. We have more money chasing fewer goods, and that leads to higher prices. So we want to tackle the problem at its root, which is to control government spending, have a dollar-for-dollar approach. That is, if the government's going to spend $1 more over here, they've got to spend $1 less somewhere else. And there are areas where we can be spending more. There are areas where we need to be spending less. And if we don't control our spending, easy for the government to promise, oh, we're going to spend more here, spend more there. But that is what's driving inflation, making everything more expensive. So the approach we want to take, again, is control government spending, address inflation. Instead of just putting more money out there, create the incentives to produce more of the things that money buys, more production, more work happening here in Canada, and get inflation under control. I think that's going to be really tackling that affordability crisis that we're facing right now.
My last questions to you, and a very important question as well, because it's again related to our youngster, future generation. Because one of the things is that from last 10 years to era of Mr. Trudeau, we didn't see that the government is really investing in the technology and the development. That's why there's a brain drain is going on, and a very skilled people are going away from this country. And we're not seeing any progress where the Canada was really a leader of technology and so many things, but we don't see that place Canada exists anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of challenges that face our economy right now. We want to see more investment get made in big projects being developed here in Canada. And I think this government has tried to take an approach where they are going to pick certain sectors. We're going to tax some and subsidize others. And I think we just need a general approach that makes Canada a good place to invest in again, by having low taxes, low inflation, predictable, streamlined regulations. The basic things that allowed us to have such a strong economy in the past, I think we've lost ground economically under this government, but I think we've got all the mojo to get it back if we have government getting out of the way. Our leader likes to talk about gatekeepers, removing the gatekeepers. What are the tax rates, the burdensome regulations that are preventing those big investments from getting made, and can we remove those gatekeepers that are getting in the way so that we can unleash our economic vitality?
I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much for visiting and giving us the time, Toronto 360 TV, and this is a really pleasure to talk with you.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you. आई होप कि आपको हमारा आज का प्रोग्राम कम्युनिटी टॉक का पसंद आया होगा, और कम्युनिटी टॉक के हमने इस प्रोग्राम के अंदर आज जो है वो MP गार्नेट साहब से जो है वो अहम तरीन मौजू के ऊपर गुफ्तगू की है। उम्मीद है आरिफ जहांगीरी जो है अगले हफ्ते फिर किसी नए प्रोग्राम और नए मौजू के साथ फिर आएगा। उस वक्त तक के लिए इजाज़त दीजिए। अस्सलाम वालेकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू, और शुक्रिया जनाब साबिर गाया साहब का, जिन्होंने आज के प्रोग्राम को जो है कवर किया है।
राह बेकर्स एंड स्वीट्स 60 साल से आपके हसी लम्हों में शामिल, खुशियों से भरे मीठे जायके, नफासत और क्वालिटी में सबसे बेहतर, खालिस अज्जा से तैयार करदा मिठाई, केक्स, बिस्किट्स एंड स्नैक्स, वही ऑथेंटिक जायका और क्वालिटी। पाकिस्तान से अब